Hey, Craig.
Hey there. Okay, we are now for real recording. Sorry about all the hassle.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's see. Call unknown. We want to record. Record. It is recording. Thank heavens. Okay, thank you so much. Sorry about all that hassle. We don't usually do interviews this way, so it's unique and it's awesome. So we made it work. Had to kind of get a little crazy there for a minute, but it's working. So, Jeff Hall, or actually it should be, how do you pronounce that? Soke, Jeff Hall?
Soke. It means founder.
Founder, okay. So Soke, Jeff Hall. And Jeff Hall is the founder of Hojutsu, and that is I like to call it how would you actually define that, Hojutsu?
Well, it's the martial art of shooting.
Yeah. And so a little bit about Jeff Hall is, so Soke Jeff Hall, and I'll just read the slightest bit of his bio because he has one of those bios that is far too vast to actually, read as an intro. But Jeff Hall has been shooting for over 50 years and has been a student of firearms combatives for 40 years. He has over 25 years of military and police experience with a strong emphasis on SWAT. And of course, he is the Soke, the founder of Hojutsu. That's one of the things we're going to talk about today, along with how Jeff Hall became Jeff Hall, your background a little bit. But I was talking to Lieutenant Colonel Grossman, and he could not say enough good things about Hojutsu, and he made me a believer. And with an opportunity to talk to the source, Jeff Hall, who is the founder, I jumped at the opportunity. So, Jeff Hall, thanks for being on the show today. And, I know everybody probably asks you this, but can we get a little bit, well, thanks for being on the show, of course, but also get a little bit of a background on you that I didn't cover in the intro. I know your background is so vast, but then also how that led to you being the founder of Hojutsu.
Well, excuse me. Army brat, lived quite a few different places. I had a little bit of boxing training when I was a kid. I went to a Catholic school in Spokane, Washington, and for recess, all the boys went into the gym, and there was a former pro fighter named Joey August. And Joey August taught us how to box just for the exercise, and that was a pretty good thing to learn at a young age. And then I always wanted to train in traditional martial arts. After I graduated from high school in 1970, went straight into the Army. Was there for 4 years. But I always wanted some place where I could train, but I moved around a lot. And in 1978, I joined the Alaska State Troopers. And my first couple of years, I went through the academy, and then I was stationed in Anchorage. And then, but before I went to the academy, they hired me as a contractor and sent me out to western Alaska, a little town called Bethel. And I was supposed to buy drugs and bootleg booze. So I got a job as a cab driver, and who knows more about where people are selling, substances than the cab driver.
Yeah.
So after that, I went to the academy, and then I was in Anchorage for 11 months, and the supervisor that I had worked for out in Bethel had been promoted to first sergeant, and he came into Anchorage and called me up and said, "Hey, let's have lunch." And he said he wanted to open a one-man post in a little village it's about 50 miles up from the mouth of the Yukon River. And he wanted to have a trooper post there. So I volunteered to do it. And so I was there for 2 years. I had 58,000 square miles. I was the only trooper. There were a couple of village police officers and some village public safety officers, but I was the only one that could do, felony arrests and all of that other stuff. And I had a brand new snow machine, a brand new riverboat, a brand new truck, and no adult supervision. My boss was 110 miles away by air because there's no roads to get to that part of Alaska. And he just said, just go do whatever you think is right. So I had a great deal of leeway. And after a couple of years, my fun meter was pretty well pegged. And I had a good friend who was also stationed out there at the same time. And he transferred into Fairbanks. And he called me up and said, hey, put in for Fairbanks. We need you. So I went to Fairbanks. And I was in Fairbanks for 5 years. I rented an apartment from another trooper, and I was in talking to a couple of the troopers, and I said, is there any martial arts here? And they said, well, there's a Taekwondo guy, and there's this guy, but there's this black guy down on 2 Street. 2 Street was Skid Row. And so I went down there one day, and they said, he's really supposed to be good. So I went down there one day, and I was in uniform, and it was down in a basement. It had been a bomb shelter during the Cold War. No ventilation, so you could smell it as soon as you started down the stairs because there was no place for all the odors to go. And I'm standing in the doorway, and a young black belt came over and said, can I help you, sir? And I said, can I watch? And he said, yeah, take your boots off and come on in. I said, I can't take them off because I'm on duty. Okay, well, just sit there and put your feet on this step. So I sat there watching this guy, and I was just taken. And I've been with him for 42 years now.
Wow.
Yep. His foundation art is Shudokan karate, not to be confused with Shotokan, which is Japanese. Shudokan is Okinawan. And he also has upper belts, 5th, 6th, 7th degree black belts, and about 7 other martial arts. And so he was one of those great experiences that you have. I still had my nose bent a little bit about Vietnam, and after Vietnam, I spent a year in Rhodesia. And so I was, I had a chip on my shoulder. But I wanted to be just like him, and I still do to this day.
Wow!
So that got me on the path of the martial way.
Well, that sounds like quite an amazing experience. Where your first duty is out in super rural Alaska, where there's no roads to get to things. So, I guess you could pretty much shoot in your backyard.
Yeah, pretty much. I lived in this little town. St. Mary's was a Catholic boarding school, and of course they had a church there, and they had teachers that came in. And in the old days, back in the, it probably ended in about the mid 60s, but it was the only place where rural students could get an education. And then they passed a law where, regardless of how big the village was, it had to have a school. So the state built all these schools, but St. Mary's was still active, and so it was a good place to be. They had. I'm right on the Yukon River. There was another river that flowed in there called the Andrevsky. And you could go up it and fish for grayling and You could fly up the Andreski in a Super Cub and have somebody drop you off, and you could hunt moose and caribou and bears and all that stuff.
Oh, that sounds heavenly. Yeah.
That was great. Yeah. And
there's not many wild places left. I mean, there isn't that many wild. Well, there are still wild places, but I think many people would really admire that. I've had the chance to live in a place like Alaska that you could say is truly still wild. There's a wild aspect of it.
Yeah, and a lot of it still is wild.
Yeah.
They've done away with the one-man posts, and now there are 2 troopers assigned to it. And typically, each trooper works 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. So you'll go out there for 2 weeks while the other trooper goes into Anchorage or wherever his residence is with his family. And then, so at the end of his 2 weeks, they just switch. And they had housing for them. And so it's a lot easier on the trooper now. But
yeah,
I don't think it'd be quite as fun.
No, probably not. The world is different. The world's different than it was then. So then, somehow or the other, you found your way to, and I want to pronounce it correctly. How do you pronounce that exactly?
Hojutsu.
Hojutsu. Okay, so let me make sure I say it right. And somehow or the other, you became the Soke, the founder of Hojutsu. And so, how did that come about?
Well, after I retired, I went to work for the National Rifle Association. I worked for them for 20 years teaching law enforcement instructor courses. It's a 40-hour course, and you got a lot of academic stuff and a lot of skills that you have to master. And I was teaching an NRA rifle course in Fairbanks. One of the police departments said, "Hey, can you come up and do an NRA school?" And so I did. And I would go down to the dojo every night. It was only a couple of miles away. And I would go down there, and I was just a black belt in the middle of a sea of about 50 black belts, because this guy had come from Japan. His title then was Kiyoshi. That means professor. And his last name was Yamazaki. And so I was just in there doing on Monday and Tuesday. And on Wednesday, I invited him to come out to the range to see what we're doing. And so we're out there, and he pulls up with Hanshy Scott. Hanshy Scott is my master. And they get out, and I went up and bowed to him, and he looked at me, and he looked at all the people that are standing there, and he goes, "This you dojo?" And I said, "Yes, sir, this is my dojo." And anyway, one of the other guys, I just asked one of the other instructors, "Hey, could you run the class here for a couple of minutes?" So I took him over to the side and where there was a berm, and I said, "Kiyoshi, have you ever shot a big bore pistol?" And he said, "Never touch a gun." So, okay. So I said, "Okay, I'm going to teach you how to do this." So I said, "Hold the gun this way." And he was a 7th or 8th Dan, and so he understood, repetitive training. And I taught him how to draw the gun, how to use the sights, how to press the trigger, all that kind of stuff. And then I loaded the gun and said, "Okay, watch the front sight, take a deep breath." I put his thumb up, take the safety off, put your finger on the trigger, and very slowly press the trigger. Boom, right between the eyes. Boom, he does another one, right between the eyes. And then he yanks on the trigger a little bit and drops it down about 2 inches. And then he says something in Japanese that he was cussing at himself, I'm sure. And then he did it again, and I said, "Okay, hold the gun here. Push the gun out. Be strong." And when you get there, stop, relax. And he relaxed, boom, right on top of the first two. And he turns to Hanshi and says something, and then he says, you come dojo tonight. So I went to the dojo, and I was a little bit late. And in Japanese and Okinawan karate, if you're late to come to the fighting floor, you kneel down and you have your head down and you extend your right arm out with your fingers straight and wait until the master says come. And so he said come, and he told everybody seiza, which means kneel down. And he goes to Mr. Scott, go. And Mr. Scott runs into the office and brings back this great big diploma that's about 2 feet by 2.5 feet, all in Japanese. And he said to the students, sometimes master, always student. Listen to your sensei. My sensei, big bore pistol, Sensei Hall. And so on this thing, he had moved me to 3rd degree black belt in his system, which is called Itate-do, and wrote on there Master of Shooting. So that was the kernel of it. And then later on, later on I went to Hanshi and said, how come shooting's not a martial art? And he said, I don't know. Well, why don't you research it? So I researched it and finally found Hojutsu on the internet. And it was started in Japan in about 1530 with Portuguese matchlock rifles. And some of the samurai, like the movie The Last Samurai,
yes.
The sword is the samurai's soul. And some of them said, we're not doing that. That's a foreign thing. But there was a battle in 1575 called the Battle of Nagashima. And one of the small warlords was able to keep the big warlord from taking over his entire property because he had the Portuguese train up 500 of his samurai, and they had a battle. They were pretty smart the way they did it, and the 500 killed almost 10,000 of the enemy samurai in one day.
Whoa.
Because they were using matchlocks. So some people accept it, some people don't. To this day, the first Hall of Fame I was inducted into, this guy said, guns don't have any business in martial arts. And I said, well, sir, martial means the arts of Mars, the Roman god of war. And firearms have been, in the Western world, been part of war since the 1500s. So there's a place for everything. And he said, well, what if I took a swing at you right now? I said, you'd probably knock me out. But across this room, you draw your katana and start screaming, coming at me, and I draw my pistol, I would own that room. And there are places where sometimes, impact weapons, empty hand weapons, all of those different things just aren't enough. So anyway, and then I got together with, I went to Hanshi Scott, and I said, well, sir, how do I get this going? And he told me, he said, well, kind of write up what you want to do. I want you to fly down to LA and talk to Soke Kubota. So I did, went down to Kubota, and his number one student was a guy named Rod Kuratomi, and Kuratomi was a gun guy, and he thought this was really a good idea. So with Soke, we talked about it, and then with Soke Kubota's permission, Rod became the number 2 guy in the system. That's Soke Dai, D-A-I. So he was Soke Dai. And we had 7 of us met up in Spokane, Washington. We had the police range. We had a big workout room. And we worked, I had developed a kata that was pretty crude. But one of the Master Bratakos was one of the guys that came up there. He's been doing karate since before I was born. Anyway, they tuned it up a little bit like that, and so that was the first kata that we did. And then we needed an impact weapon, so I came up with a cane kata, a walking cane. I trained with Grandmaster Mark Shuey, who started Cane Masters. And if you ever take a look at Mr. Shuey's website, canemasters.com, he sold out that name, though, to somebody else, but you'll never look at an old guy with a cane through the same lens, because you know that he can just thump you with that thing. And then we decided one of the other plank owners is a guy named Sensei Tangen, and he's got a second dan in Taekwondo, and he studied Ornice under Grandmaster Prasis, and who was one of Denny Santos' students. So we included a knife kata in it, because there's a lot of places you can't go and take a gun, but you can maybe have a folding knife, and you can certainly have a stick in your hand. So the whole thing I want our students to be able to do is from flat on their backs to 500 yards. We want them to have the mindset, the skills, the knowledge, the ability, and the tools to win fights.
That makes sense. And the qualifications you have per belt level are there on the site, and they're quite impressive. So one thing I'd say is before that is I understand people with that mentality of there's no place for firearms in martial arts, but like you mentioned, the samurai use them. I mean, and also martial arts, to me, they're so often a collection of martial arts that already exist, that are then mixed and tailored for a specific purpose. And if one is going to study martial arts that are most poignant today, like always, it's going to be, like all of history, it's going to be a mix of previous martial arts. And, weapons are in no way new to the martial arts. It might be that just in recent history, guns may seem new to us, but they've never been foreign to martial arts anyway. And if one does go to any, let's say something very, street proficient, I guess you'd say, like Krav Maga, one of the things you're going to do constantly is train against knife and machete and guns. So in any relevant martial arts, you're training against being shot, being stabbed, being hit with a stick. Right. So it just seems that I just think it's a misunderstanding that people have. And I can say that, like, Lieutenant Colonel Grossman definitely convinced me that one thing is, if people, let's say, if we're going to train for the real world, for reality, there's a very good chance that someone's going to attack you with a knife, and you're going to take it from them and subdue them. Same thing with a gun or a stick or a machete. So the idea of having, I guess, it just seems like it's a little bit of a step for some people to learn how to be offensive, not just defensive against weapons. But I think that might be something that people have to let go, because, like, when I look at the training criteria for belts, for leveling, they're extreme. I mean, a person is definitely learning an art, and it's going to take a while to get those belts, to get those levels, because especially it starts, I think you mentioned, initially with the handgun, then and then eventually it gets to the rifle. And anyone who's not familiar with it, I mean, shooting 25 yards, 7 yards, even 50, really you can kind of do with your eyes closed. You can just know where the target is. But when you start hitting 100 yards, that's a different story. 300, whole different story. 500, different story. So this is just like we had Zen archery at one time. Shooting at distance is, I think it's as relevant as as a deep skill as any with any weapon, really. So I'm glad that you're getting people past the stigma that only certain weapons are acceptable in martial arts and then certain are not. Because I guess you'd say on the street, in reality, anything goes. So you better be ready for anything.
Yeah, I think. Well, it does. I agree. And if somebody confronts you on the street and draws a knife and you draw a gun, he just realizes that, gee, I probably shouldn't take a knife to what's going to be a gunfight. And exactly. You can win by intimidation more easily. But if you have to shoot, you have to shoot. But in our testing, we shoot 3 different tests, and we shoot them in a specific order. The first test is just kind of a warm-up. The second test is balancing speed and accuracy. And the third test is mostly just accuracy. It's an old 60-round PPC course. But most people can't slow themselves down. One of my early mentors was a guy named Chuck Taylor, and he's a Vietnam vet. And yeah, well, you must know Chuck or know of him. He died 3-4 years ago. Yeah. I was down there, and we hired him to come up to Alaska and give us a class on shooting from helicopters. I had already done that once as a trooper. But he said, and he had all these pretty good thoughts. The master uses all the time available. So if you're trying to shoot somebody at 50 yards and you have cover, and you should take all the time you can to get that perfect shot. And as we score these, the heavy outside line of the torso, there might be, blank paper around it. Yeah. If they go outside the black line, they fail. And if they're doing that on their last test and they throw one out and fail, they got to start all over again. Because every bullet that comes out of every muzzle has a lawyer's name and phone number on it. And we don't want to be the guys that are running around and having people get injured that shouldn't be injured. So and it's one of the few martial arts that's purely objective. A lot of times, like Soke Dai Kuratomi, one day he and Soke Kubota are walking out the door, and Soke Kubota goes, "Oh, you sixth dan now." So just because time in grade or whatever it was, But no, you have to pass the tests, and you have to pass the tests in order. And people say, well, that's really hard. Well, train harder. But it's a standard that you just can't argue with, except if you can't shoot that well.
Yeah, and that's the art. And I like the way it's, formalized into something, a training regimen that's built around, discipline and respect. And because, for me, I did karate as a kid when I was much younger, Kenpo karate, and that was very good for me. And then, recent years, I've done other striking martial arts, but most recently I've gotten into Aikido, and I think that might be my favorite of all things I've ever done because, Aikido is just mystical, but beyond that, you start with weapons. You start, everything is kind of the same, whether you have a sword, a stick, or a knife, or you're just using your hands. There's only the slightest differences. So, for people who might be guns, firearms in martial arts, realize that, a very unique martial art like Aikido, you start your first day with a a wooden sword in your hand, learning, you know. So, and also I think that, so I think one of the apprehensions people might have is they think that an individual is going to do a martial art that's only with the gun. And even if you did, that's totally fine. But I don't know many martial artists who have ever done just one thing. And I think that, you know, Hojutsu would be, you know, one of the many disciplines, or one of the few disciplines, that a fully rounded martial artist is going to have. And then if that person is pro Second Amendment and firearms, great. If they're not, it doesn't really matter. I think to really be a truly proficient martial artist in the world today, they're missing a serious foundation if they're not doing Hojutsu. That's just my take on it, or at least having some interest in offensive use of weapons as well.
Well, you know, the problem is with most traditional weapons, you can't walk down the street in Phoenix with a katana in your hand. You're going to be talking to a nice Phoenix police officer over the front side of a shotgun. In California, nunchaku, a dagger or dirk, they're illegal to even possess outside of a training school. So, but America is pretty much used to people in any decent state, you know, carrying guns and being able to use them efficiently and correctly.
No, it's true. It's true. And I also think that Hojutsu, maybe one of the advantages it has for, I'd say America, to the world, but I'll focus on America since this is where I'm standing, is maybe it would help to get rid of that stigma that many have when it comes to firearms, because when you formalize it into a martial art, and if we start seeing, well, Hojutsu studios, or, you know, many studios train in several different martial arts, if that becomes one of them, I think that that would create a tremendous amount of familiarity and just change the way people see weapons. Like I can think of, like, Krav Maga, for instance. Plenty of people that I've, you know, done Krav Maga with at different studios, they find guns distasteful. You know, they're not interested. But since you train so much around weapons in that martial art, that the next thing you know, they own and carry a Glock 19. You know, part of it is just that familiarity. They just never knew. They just never understood. And they were told that that culture and those weapons are bad. And now they get formally introduced in a respectful manner of training that truly is regimented and difficult. I think it can't help but be very, very good for the Second Amendment. Have you found that it has changed people's minds?
Some people, and some people just say, well, it doesn't belong in martial arts. But if they see the end product, somebody who's trained 5 or 6 years, Colonel Grossman's grandson, Tannen, came to a class, and he just left it, you know, all abuzz, but everything was yes sir, no sir. I didn't have any altruistic things about this is going to change the world, but I've had all kinds of people come and watch a seminar. Boy, I can't believe how polite these people are. All these guys that are carrying guns. Well, just because you carry a gun doesn't mean you're not polite. And it might be helpful if maybe people learn self-discipline, self-respect, and respect for others by training in this, and maybe we'll have fewer knuckleheads running around the streets. I don't know.
I think so. I mean, especially when, well, something that's astounded me with, you know, a martial art that's new to me, Aikido, is usually at many martial arts studios, you have kids classes. It's a lot of money for the studios. So they like to have, you know, kids classes, and they're often kind of a mix between like a dojo and a zoo. The discipline level is pretty much non-existent. But then in Aikido, I was amazed just because, complete used to call it discipline. I mean, all the kids were tuned in. They knew what was going on. They were listening. They were respectful. They were bowing. And I just thought, now this is completely good. You know, nobody was forcing them. Nobody was being mean to them. You just walk into the dojo, and you just can't help it, even if you're a kid.
Well, Master Funakoshi wrote in his book, The Precepts of Martial Arts, is Rei, R-E-I. That means respect. And he said, without Rei, it is just beastly fighting. And that's true. Because if you, I don't know any martial artists that are out there trying to get in fights all the time just to prove how tough they are. No good ones.
Yes.
But there's the number 2 guy up at the Fairbanks Dojo. His name is Dennis Swarthout. His title is Renshi. He, if you ever watch him do a kata, it's the prettiest thing you've ever seen a man do. But he's got power, he's got skill. He says, but if I practice 5 different things for being on the street. And he likes this kind of a uppercut cross coming up. He says, somebody bothers my wife or one of my boys, I'm just going to lay him out. And he did that once down in Las Vegas and in front of 3 Las Vegas Metro policemen. And they arrested the guy that he hit because the guy turned around and was yelling, screaming at him, telling him he was going to rip his effing head off and all that kind of stuff. Dennis hit him once, and the guy was down. And one of the Metro officers came over and said, nice hit.
Oh, good. Yes.
Yeah. He said, so you were placed in fear by his words and actions, right? Yes, sir, I was. Okay. We'll handcuff him and have a nice day. So, but he focused on stuff that works. And, people say, oh, kata, that's just dojo ballet. Well, kata teaches you proper form. And if your form is right, then the chances of you delivering the energy from your hands or your feet or your 45, it's a good thing. So anyway, we all have to, and I've had people that aren't very, they don't pay much attention, and I'm kind of anyway. But I've got a poster down there in my room down at the shop. It's from Bruce Lee. You must take the abilities and limitations of every student into consideration. Hanshi had a student that did kata on 2 crutches. And,
wow.
And he said, well, he's developing some skill that might help him at some point. So, everybody's welcome. I typically, if I have a brand new shooter, I start them with a .22 pistol, so they learn how to shoot a gun. They're not intimidated by the report or the recoil. And then once they do that, they graduate up to typically a semi-automatic pistol. I make once you pass your 3rd dan, you can't go any higher until you come back and pass the 1st dan test with a revolver, because you got to be able to know how to run a wheel gun. Yeah. And then then after 3rd dan, it's time and grade, plus they all have to do some precision rifle work. We like to go down to Thunder Ranch, which is 16 miles north of the California border in Lakeview, Oregon. And it's run and owned by a guy named Clint Smith, who's the best firearms instructor left on the face of the earth. He was a deputy after Vietnam. He was a Marine. I think he was shot twice. And then he was a deputy in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And he is just, he'll teach you how, he'll fine polish everything that you're doing. He has different perspectives on some things, but he's really a good instructor. But would go to his mid-range rifle course, so we shot out to 700 yards. Everybody, I said, okay, you got to hit every piece of steel out to 500. And then by the end of the third day, I hit every piece of steel out to 600. So I worked better than my low expectations of myself. But you got a guy like that who says, hey, why don't you try this? And you try that, and oddly enough, it works. So, but I think it's important that we all be able to protect ourselves, our families. The world is getting less and less civil, and I think it's incumbent upon every single person to be able to protect themselves.
And that self-reliance is very American. And that's something that, I definitely promote, I believe in. And I think that it is sad that in the country we see many people who want to surrender that defense to, I guess, the state, I guess, the government. There's a lot of stuff going on that's not incredible right now. So I think that all we really can do is, keep training. And one of the things I really like about Hojutsu is that it's a respectful, I love the word rei, that really fits, formalized, definitely skillful, learning of firearms that I think would work for a lot of people, and I think really puts it in the right perspective because, anybody who's, shoots, however that is, whether you're a hunter or you carry a gun or you just shooting cans off the fence on the weekend with a 22, doesn't really matter. You've had people ask, hey, I want to learn how to shoot. And I think that I think Hojutsu is a great place to point people, try this, because one of the frustrating things I find with people who want to learn to shoot is most of the time they just want you to give them a loaded gun and they shoot a target with it and then they give it back to you. And that's just something I won't do. I'm like, you're going to have to put the effort forth, the hours forth to learn something because, the truth is I want you to be safe. I don't want you to hurt people or anyone or yourself or shoot anything you don't mean to. But also, I don't want you to miss out on, now I can say not just what firearms are about, but also what martial arts are about. Because you're just pulling the triggers, just scraping the surface.
Yeah. Chuck Taylor came up with two tests. One was the Handgun Combat Master. It's the hardest shooting test I've ever done. I think I failed it 46 times before I finally passed.
Oh my gosh!
And wow. that was with a Colt 1911, and then I passed it with a revolver, and I later passed his 4-weapon master, where you shoot in this order: pistol, submachine gun, shotgun, and then rifle. So you beat yourself to death with a rifle or with a shotgun, and then you got to shoot these precision shots in really short time. But so I've done those, and I think any structured program that gives you a goal, that you can achieve, but you might not be able to achieve it the first time. You might take 46 tries like I did before you finally pass it. And I've been shooting since I was 4. I'm 71 now. My dad was an all-Army rifle and pistol champion. So I learned how to shoot correctly from the very beginning. And, once you know sights and trigger and can do that consistently, then that's the biggest thing to overcome is your aversion to a good trigger press. Anyway.
Oh, yeah.
So.
we've covered a lot. And so if people want to learn more about Hojutsu, of course there's your website and such, and I'll have all that linked in the show notes. But it seems like there are seminars that travel around, and there are places that they can get into it if they're close enough. But the Hojutsu is expanding, and as you mentioned, definitely people who know a good shooting range, gun club, etc., they can get you guys out there to do some training.
Well, we don't have a dojo in Arizona right now, Greg. I think it's time you reach out to some of your folks and see if we can put something together.
I'm going to do that, and I've actually there are some great firearms training groups here, companies that are really top notch, and they have the right mindset. And I think there's definitely right here in the Scottsdale, Phoenix, Mesa area some like-minded firearms training, and also martial arts studios that I think. So I'm going to work on that and see if I can make it happen, because I want to do Hojutsu and I want to train with people and do it. And so I'll have to just bring it here, because I'm stuck here. I really can't go anywhere else right now. So, so I'll just make it happen here.
Well, that'd be good. If we can get 12, 14, 16 people, we'll start the first day in the dojo with blue guns while we're trying to work out the draw stroke and some of the other stuff. In all of these things, we also include punches, kicks, blocks, weapon retention, weapon takeaways, all that other stuff.
Yes.
Because the pistol should be your last resort. Or as one of my black belts, Masad Ayub, says, in the gravest extreme. And if you can turn the guy off by, before you have to draw a gun, that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, Masad Ayub, another incredible character. I'm not sure how old he is right now, but he's still training. That man, he doesn't seem to age. I think he stopped aging around 80 and just keeps going. So
yeah.
Yeah, it goes to show what having a passion in life can do for you.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah. Well, Jeff Hall, thanks so much for being on. I'll be talking to you. We'll get something set up here in Arizona, and other people listening to this, hey, get it set up in your state as well. This is an important thing. Jiu-Jitsu really is, and I think it's going to, we're going to make sure it gets bigger, because it needs to. So
if they want to reach out to me, they can go to the website forceoptions.net, or they can just send me an email at soke@hojutsu.com.
Gotcha. All right, everybody, let's get to it.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Jeff Hall.
You bet.
Bye-bye.